Travel by sea is very alluring. The endless expanse of water is perhaps one of the prettiest sights you will ever see, but that does not mean it's without its dangers. And not just seasickness, there are some major disasters which happen at sea. Some are because of nature, some are man-made, but they are all pretty gruesome. Here's a look at some of the worst sea disasters. Number 15. MV Wilhelm Gustloff. During the end of the Second World War, the Soviet army was advancing, and rapidly so, and anything German was the enemy. Sadly, that also meant the MV Wilhelm Gustloff, a German ocean liner. With the looming defeat of Germany, about 11,000 people were on board the ship, which was meant for only 1,900, to escape the war. And when a Russian submarine came upon the ship, they fired 3 torpedoes. The result was catastrophic. The ship sunk, and there were not enough lifeboats. Almost 9,343 people died, including children. This was the worst maritime tragedy in history. Number 14. Costa Concordia. The Costa Concordia was one of the biggest ships built in Italy. It was a cruise liner which was on its first leg of a cruise around the Mediterranean when it decided to go off course at the Isola del Giglio. The waters were calm and no one could have foreseen the disaster that awaited. The ship struck a rock formation which was submerged underwater on the 13th of January, 2012. There was massive damage and a huge rescue operation was undertaken to save the people on board. However, 32 people still lost their lives. And the worst part was that the captain and the crew had abandoned ship while there were over 300 people still on board. They were found guilty later, and the captain was sentenced to 16 years in jail. Number 13. MV Princess of the Stars. There is something to be said about humans ignoring nature's warning. When the MV Princess of the Stars set sail from Manila on the 20th of June, 2008, there were clear warnings about Typhoon Frank. What was worse was that the Princess of the Stars was a cargo vessel, and yet it was carrying passengers. The captain had been advised to delay the departure, but he ignored the warnings, and the ship was caught in the eye of Typhoon Frank. It resulted in one of the worst sea disasters in recent history, as only 28 of the 800 passengers were reported safe. 400 bodies are yet to be found, while over 130 exhumed bodies could not be recognized. Number 12. RMS Lancastria. The Second World War was probably the greatest disaster to have ever happened in human history, and the story of RMS Lancastria is one of its many agonizing tales. It was commandeered by the British government to bring back the British troops and nationals from France after the Dunkirk evacuation. There were between 4,000 and 9,000 people on board when the Germans dropped 3 bombs on it. Lancastria went down in under 20 minutes, as 1,400 tons of oil leaked into the sea. The rescue operations couldn't amount to much, as it is believed that over 4,000 people lost their lives in the disaster. Number 11. MS Al Salam Boccaccio. Originally built as a ferry as one of the 8 Poet-class ships in Italy, it had a capacity of 500 passengers and 200 automobiles. Later renovations increased its capacity before it was sold to the El Salam Shipping Company in 1999. On the 2nd of February, 2006, the ship departed to Saudi Arabia, carrying about 1,400 people and 220 vehicles. But a fire broke out on the ship, and as the crew were fighting the fire, water accumulated in the lower deck, including the car deck area. The captain ordered the ship to turn around, but during the turn, the Al Salam Boccaccio capsized and sank in less than 10 minutes. The SOS sent out by the ship was not answered till 12 hours later, and there were only 400 people who could be rescued. There is no information about the remaining, although 185 bodies were recovered. Number 10. RMS Lusitania. Travels during the World War were fraught with danger, not just on land, but on the sea as well. The RMS Lusitania learned this the hard way when on the 7th of May, 1915, a German U-boat torpedoed and sunk the ship. There were over 1,900 passengers on the 32,000-ton ship. What made it worse was that the Lusitania was carrying over 173 tons of munitions, which was probably the reason why it sank in under 20 minutes. There were over 120 Americans on board the ship, and the RMS Lusitania turned the public opinion against the Germans during the First World War. It was probably one of the reasons why the Americans entered the war against the Germans in the first place. Number 9. MS Estonia. With over 15 years of successful ferrying of people and cargo, the MS Estonia changed many hands before coming to the Estonia Shipping Company in the 1990s. But in September of 1994, its glorious run came to an abrupt end when rough winds and massive waves caused its visor to break off. This let the water in and the ship turned on its side, but about 20 minutes later, it went below the water. A massive rescue operation was soon underway, but the frigid water saw to it that no one under the age of 12 survived, and only 7 over age 55 survived. Almost 852 lives were lost, and poor maintenance and faulty construction was blamed for this disaster. Number 8. HMT Royal Edward. The HMT Royal Edward was a Canadian northern steamship which could accommodate up to 114 passengers. During the First World War, it was being used to bring Canadian troops to Europe, and when it embarked on the 28th of July, 1915 for Gallipoli, the German UB-14 submarine launched a torpedo which struck the Royal Edward in the stern. The ship sunk in under 6 minutes, and only around 660 men could be saved. There were over 935 casualties, although the actual figure may have been higher. Number 7. RMS Empress. On the 29th of May, 1914, Canada witnessed one of its worst maritime disasters when the RMS Empress of Ireland collided with the Norwegian freighter Storstand in the Gulf of Canada's St. Lawrence River. The Empress was carrying over 1,000 passengers and crew, and the Storstand reportedly penetrated 15 feet of Empress's hull. It sunk within 14 minutes and led to a loss of over 1,500 people, even though safety precautions were top-notch on the ship. But on the fateful day, there was a heavy fog blanket and the confusion led to only 7 lifeboats escaping. Number 6. SS Sultana. On April 27, 1865, many people were hopeful. After all, they were Union prisoners of war and had just been released, and those 2,300 people were aboard the SS Sultana off the coast of Tennessee. But tragedy struck, and the Sultana exploded and sank, killing almost 1,700 people. 3 of the 4 boilers of the steamship exploded, and perhaps the reason the toll was so high was because it was overloaded by a huge margin. The disaster came just as the Civil War ended, so it was largely forgotten, but still remains one of the worst maritime disasters. Number 5. MV Donna Paz. The Philippines had a large number of passenger ferries, as they are one of the cheaper and more popular ways to travel. But on the 20th of December, 1987, as many as 4,000 people boarded the Donna Paz to travel from Leyte Island to Manila. What they did not know was that only 24 of them would survive the journey. The Donna Paz collided with the MT Vector, which was carrying over 8,800 gallons of fuel. The collision was followed by an explosion, and many passengers jumped ship, but they were caught in the blaze on the surface of the water. The rescue operation took hours, and even then, only 108 bodies were recovered, and most of them were burnt beyond recognition. Number 4. MV Jula. The MV La Jula was a Senegalese government-owned ferry operating off the coast of Gambia. It was designed for approximately 580 passengers, but as is often the case, it was overcrowded. Estimates say that there were 2,000 people on board on the 26th of December, 2002. Jula sailed off right into a storm, and the rough seas and the wind soon capsized the ship, and the passengers went overboard. Reports say that all this happened in under 5 minutes. And only 1 lifeboat could be released with just 25 passengers. The government rescue ships could not arrive till morning, but local fishermen saved as many as they could during the night. Still, the loss of life was humongous, with at least 1,863 people dying. Number 3. SS Eastland. The exuberance on the 24th of July, 1915 was palpable, as thousands had gathered along the Chicago River for the annual Western Electric employee picnic. It was supposed to be a day of fun and frolic, and over 7,000 tickets had been sold. 5 excursion boats had been hired, and one of them was the SS Eastland, also known as the Speed Queen of the Great Lakes. Over 2,500 people were on board the Eastland when it rolled into the river at the wharf's edge. Over 844 people lost their lives, despite timely efforts by the people and police. Number 2. SS Kenya. The World War left behind many harrowing tales, but none were as ironic as the one which took a few years after the end of the war. The SS Kenya was packed with refugees from the Chinese Civil War during its 1948 voyage, when it hit a mine left behind the World War. The Kenya exploded and sank about 50 miles south of Shanghai. The death toll was massive, with reports saying that almost 3,920 people met their ends in the disaster. Number 1, you guessed it, the Titanic. Perhaps the most famous maritime disaster ever was the sinking of the unsinkable ship, the Titanic. It was one of the largest and most luxurious ocean liners ever built, and was supposed to be the fastest ship in the world. The hull was designed with 16 compartments, each watertight. The ship could stay afloat even if 4 of these filled with water, and hence was considered unsinkable. There were over 2,200 passengers and crew on board its maiden voyage to New York from Southampton. However, just before midnight on the 14th of April, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg which ruptured 5 of its chambers. This caused the bow to sink and the stern to rise to an almost vertical position. Of the 2,200 passengers, only about 700 survived, mostly women and children. It remains one of the greatest maritime disasters ever. Let us know in the comments if you've heard of other major maritime disasters, and remember to subscribe for free to get instant alerts on our videos.